Hello, everyone. It's another Friday, which means it is an Ask Me Anything live session here with Experience Investigators. My name is Jeannie Walters. I'm the founder and CEO of Experience Investigators, and I'm always so happy that you join me here for our live sessions where we cover all sorts of topics within customer experience. Today, we're going to be talking about something that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, but it's called a service code. And the idea here is that a service code actually empowers your employees to deliver exceptional experiences. So we'll talk about that. We'll not only talk about it, we're going to show you a template so that you can go ahead and act on this right away. As always, we are interested in your questions. Drop them into chat. And as always, I have David Hornreich, our Director of Marketing, here with us today. David, how are you?
I'm very well, very well. Thinking about my favorite cat food commercials. Jeannie and I were just talking about cat food commercials of all things before we went on
Mhm.
air.
I
So
mean, we're
if you're in the chat,
professionals.
yeah, if you're in the chat, if you have a favorite pet food commercial, let us know what it is. And otherwise, yeah, let us know your questions at any point. Throw those in the chat, and we'll get to
Mhm,
them at the end.
mhm.
Really excited for today's topic. So, Jeannie, shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it.
All right, let's do it.
S Thanks, David. So, the other thing I'll say about pets, though, is if you are not signed up for our email newsletter, I know many of you follow us here on LinkedIn and other places, but we have an email newsletter. This week, we sent out dog pictures. So, we had that going for us. We got a lot of fun reaction to that because I was sharing a little example of how dogs can help us understand customer experience. So, if you haven't signed up, please feel free to use that link that is dropped in there and we'd love to have you there too. So, hello, everybody. My name is Jeannie Walters, and we are here today to talk about a service code. And so, when we are jumping into these topics, I know sometimes they create bigger questions for you. Feel free to reach out. We actually create a lot of our content based on what you are looking for. We know that many of you are customer experience leaders. Many of you are customer experience change agents within your organization. You might not have customer experience in your title or even in your department, but you know that this is the way forward. We have so many resources and tools for people just like you. So check out our website at experienceinvestigators.com. Check out all the free resources we have at yearofcx.com. And if you have something you want to ask about, if you have content you want us to address, please feel free to reach out and let us know. All right. So why are we talking about service code today? Well, the big reason is that when I talk to different customer experience leaders, I hear a refrain about it's so obvious, right? Why aren't people behaving the way we want them to when it's so obvious to us what they should do? And I hear this about things like, gosh, they should just know to call people back within a certain amount of time or people should know that when somebody comes into the store they need to be welcomed. All of these things seem so obvious. But it might not be obvious to everybody. And so, what we need to do is take all of our efforts around defining successful customer experiences in our organization and then bring that down to what are the actual actions and behaviors that we are expecting from employees who interact directly with customers. So, we talk a lot about a customer experience mission statement here. That's your North Star, that's your guide, but then you want to take that and your service code becomes the map to get there. So today we're going to be talking about different ways that you can actually implement and use your service code moving forward. So these are the steps that we've identified for creating a CX service code. One is ask what interactions have with your employees. We'll get into this, but this is essentially being realistic about what kind of business you're in and how you're interacting with your customers. Number two, look to your CX mission to direct behaviors. We've said before, this is your North Star. This is one of the many, many ways to use that mission statement. You want to brainstorm a list of emotions that you actually want your customers to feel. And then you want to decide on 3 to 5 behaviors that are universal. And by universal, I mean, this isn't really about the nitty gritty how. This is about how we promise to show up no matter what and putting that into activities and behaviors. And then finally, we want to define and decide what are those specific actions or behaviors required to deliver on this promise to make sure that we are showing up in a way that is aligned with our customer experience mission and delivering consistent service no matter what happens. So, the first question here is we need to ask ourselves, what are those interactions that customers are having with employees? Because your organization might look different than somebody else's. A lot of times when we talk about service codes and service guidelines, we talk about brands like Disney or Zappos, or I like to bring up Aveda because they do a great job in their stores. So when we're talking about that, it's really easy to think, well, gosh, I'm in B2B manufacturing. What does this have to do with me? We don't have a retail shop. We don't sell widgets. But you still have a customer experience and you still have people in your organization, like salespeople, like repair people, like maybe customer success managers or account managers who deal directly with customers. And we want to make sure that everybody who interacts directly with a customer really understands what is the service that we are providing? What are the promises that we've made? And how are we aligned on exactly the kind of experience that we're delivering? So this is really, we want to look at, okay, who interacts with the customers and what are those interactions like? Because if you're walking into a store and you've never met anybody before and you have no customer information, that's a different experience than if somebody calls into your customer service line and that contact center rep has all the information in front of them about that customer. We can make different decisions based on those different scenarios. Then we want to look at our CX mission. This is really where we get real about, okay, what is the promise that we've made? How do we want to show up no matter what? And how can we translate this into behaviors that people interacting directly with customers can show up and deliver? So we want to think about how many aspects of this we can do in those interactions that we just defined. And then emotions, we can never forget about emotions. How do we want our customers to feel? This is really where we want to consider if somebody's walking into our store, just as a simple example, and we say, well, welcome them. Well, welcome could just be, hey, it could be something where we say, let me know if you need anything. Or it could be a warm welcome, right? There's a salon that actually introduced this idea of a literal warm welcome because here in Chicago, we have very cold winters. And so what they realized was people were coming in to the salon and a few minutes early and they would be waiting and they would be doing this, right? We're all warming up our hands. So they actually introduced this idea where they come over with a warm washcloth and wrap your hands up to give you literally a warm welcome. So there are steps like that that you can translate into these really specific behaviors and actions that show up in the way that your mission provides. And what is that emotion we want somebody to feel? Well, if we wanted to have them feel like they are welcomed warmly, that's a great place to start. So that's where we want to get into why do we care about their emotions? Because that's what translates into the behaviors that we want our customer employees, our customer facing employees to really exhibit. And then you want to decide on 3 to 5 behaviors that are universal. Now, you can always drill down for these specifics, these specific areas, but you want to start at that macro level. What do we want to do no matter what? Because the more consistent that you can be in customer experience, the more that you will have higher customer metrics. People will feel more cared for throughout the journey because they know what the expectations are. But you also want to simplify this so that everybody throughout the organization understands that, you know what, we are going to commit to showing up for customers in a certain way. We are going to commit to when we know somebody's name, we're going to ask them if we can address them by name. It's really that simple. Something that simple can turn into a universal part of your service code. And then you want to dig into roles and scenarios to decide what specific actions or behaviors are required. So you want to really start at that macro level and say, we're all agreeing to these things. But then if you work in procurement or if you work in purchasing or in like distribution, you might want to get really specific about what are some of the actions that we all agree to. A lot of this can be in B2B around responsiveness. What are we committing to when somebody contacts us? What is the maximum amount of time we're going to let pass before they get an answer to something. That could be part of your service code. And that can be very specific for the type of department or role that you play. And then once you have this service code, we need to use it. And I really like this because it can be very helpful for hiring and onboarding in those customer facing roles. You can actually say, hey, these are the expectations that we have. How do you feel about that? Would you be comfortable with that? Are there any behaviors here that you think should be changed or that you have an opinion about? There are so many ways to interact, but it really starts making things real. And it starts everybody off realizing that, you know what, this is how we're judging performance as well. So the brands that do this really well, they use their service code to actually have those employee evaluations and discussions so that they can say, here are the 10 behaviors that we've identified as part of our service code. How do you feel you're doing on that? Do you have everything you need for that? If we ask you to practice empathy and we haven't given you the right tools to do that, that's another part of the discussion as well. So these can be kind of as broad and simple or as detailed as you want. I always say start with that simple, start with the macro, because that's something you can make universally accepted. And then your teams might feel empowered to say, you know what, in order to really deliver on this service code, we need to take that a step further and get into these details about what that really means. So we have an example for you, a little template. So if you're thinking about doing this for yourself, look at the following things. You want to have your company, obviously, but then you also want to have your CX mission statement front and center. You want to make sure that your CX mission statement is being used as that touchstone, as that North Star. So the service code in very simple terms might be our customers deserve fast, friendly, and scientifically accurate widgets, right? Sounds good. We show up for customers with a smile, even if we're on the phone, with gratitude, not just because they're our customers, but as true innovators, and with humility, because sometimes our customers are ahead of us. Now, this is a fictitious example, obviously, but this is based on a few conversations I've had with different organizations who really do have to think about this sometimes. When you're in high tech or really specific engineering or things like that, it can it can be easy to make some assumptions about your customers. And by adding some of these things, it helps everybody take that breath and realize, you know what, this is how we're going to show up because this is what our customers deserve. And then you can get into those specific commitments. So in this case, a lot of this is about responsiveness because that was a big issue. So we deliver our customers specifically for our customers to focus on fast, friendly service with the following commitments. And I like that word commitments because that's something, again, you can use as you're hiring, as you're evaluating, as you're talking about these different roles. So customers receive responses to inquiries within 2 hours. Customers are updated every 24 hours on open issues. Mistakes are corrected promptly, and employees are empowered to provide replacement or repair services. The tie goes to the customer. When in doubt, the customer is believed and served. And so this service code gets into a little more specifics about what is that mission really saying and how can we deliver on it. And then if you have folks in retail or cashiers or things like that, you can get even more specific about these are the steps. One of my favorite examples of that is Aveda. They have 4 distinct steps as somebody walks in and to one of their stores. And one of my favorite parts about it is that those 4 steps do not include the word sell. They include the word, yeah, discover needs and connect, and then finally confirm. That's how they want to get people to think about it. So it's very specific, but it's also allowing your employees to be empowered and do this in their own way as well. So these are the steps to actually create a service code. I would encourage you to think about it and just get started because sometimes we make this bigger than it is. Sometimes we can make this as simple as, you know what, we're going to address somebody by name and we're going to show up with a smile. And then you can start looking for the behaviors that customers really react to. You can start drilling into those specific behaviors for your specific teams or departments to make sure that they're able to do this, that they have the tools, and that everybody understands what those expectations are. So there we go. Don't worry about perfection. This is a mantra of mine because many of you have heard me say this when I talk about journey mapping too, because really it's about progress. It's about uh, process over perfection. And what we want to do is make sure that we are focused on taking action. It can be very easy to get caught up in the documentation of it and, okay, what is that going to look like forever? But I encourage you to think about this as something that you can iterate on, that you can evolve, because as you get to know this and as things start spreading, you'll hear employees who have great ideas around this too. They'll say, I know we're supposed to be super responsive to our customers. But I've run into this issue, or I've felt like sometimes I don't have the right information and they don't have the right tools. What is obvious to somebody isn't always obvious to somebody else. So we have to articulate that and define it and tie it all back to that customer experience mission. So with that, I would love to hear questions. It looks like we have some good discussion already happening, but feel free to drop those into chat. And I know we also had a couple great questions come in earlier about this topic through email and things like that. So let us know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's start with a question that came in from LinkedIn earlier in the week. This one is from Nayara, who asks, do you consider that the customer success management team, along with the customer experience team, has more responsibility on the customer experience than other teams? And if
Ooh.
so, how can the CSM team do a better
Mhm,
job? And if not, where does the
mhm.
responsibility lie?
The zillion-dollar question again, where does CX live and how do we do this? So really, really good question. I personally, so sometimes I make a distinction between accountability and responsibility. And so you're asking, are they responsible for customer experience? Well, yes, and everybody is. Everybody is responsible for customer experience. But we want to also have some accountability around it. And so the accountability might live with the customer experience team. But what that means is that they have to make sure that they're accountable through influence, through advocacy, through helping everybody get on the same page. But they can't necessarily make all of the improvements or changes. They don't have the authority to do that. So their role is really around influence and education and empowerment and accountability in some regards around are we taking the right steps? Are we putting in the right efforts to actually change the things that we need to change? The customer success managers, especially in technology firms and folks like that, they have a ton of responsibility around creating that proactive journey for the customer. So, for example, if the customer success managers are told just to kind of sit back and wait for things to go wrong and just be that contact, they're really not empowered to be responsible for the customer journey. If they're told, you know what, here's what you look for, here are the customer health scores that you look for that tell you, you better reach out, you should see if they're doing okay. How can we predict what's going to happen for the customer and make it as seamless and effortless as possible? So I hesitate to say yes, no matter what, because it really depends on what are the roles as they're defined and have we empowered and enabled these teams to actually be responsible for the customer journey. And most of the time we haven't yet. So I think that ideally, in an ideal world, the customer experience leadership is coming from the very, very top. We want the C suite to understand that customer experience is not an add on, it's not something we bolt on to the business plan. It is a business discipline. It is how we do business, how we show up. The way we talk about it at Experience Investigators is it's a mindset, it's a strategy, and it's a discipline. And we have to think about it that way. Just like if you have, an engineering team and they say, yes, we're very disciplined about engineering, but they never actually defined what is the goal that they're trying to accomplish, then you're going to have a whole bunch of cool widgets and processes and things like that, but not much else. So we want to make sure that we're starting with that mindset. we're moving into and defining what is the strategy and how will that help not just our customers, but also our organization, and then apply the discipline to it. And that's where you get into accountability and responsibility for these various teams. So that was perfect timing, David, because I'm wrapping up there.
I popped in early. Heard you wrapping up. Let's go to a follow-up question. I don't know if Christopher intended this as a follow-up question, but I think that it is a brilliant question in the same vein.
Mm,
So who owns the service code
mhm.
and how often should it be reviewed?
Yeah, very good question. So, whoo, another one that I hate this answer, but it depends. Sometimes what I like to see is that if you do have that cross-functional CX team, that they actually do own this in some ways. And I say in some ways because you absolutely need buy-in and input from those people who are actually delivering the service to your customers. So if you're building this for the first time, I would recommend having some sort of leadership from CX, and that could even just be the executive sponsor that also helps your CX team. It could be, the team that is responsible for developing the CX mission. So whoever you have at that level, it is very helpful to have that as kind of the point of leadership. But then you want to get a lot of buy-in from the people who are working, interacting directly with customers. So I would create the team to build this that includes if you have cashiers, if you have repair people, if you have procurement people who interact or invoicing, or I mean, the list goes on, customer success managers. You want to get everybody together and say, okay, what can we commit to no matter what? And then you can actually kind of empower each team to own the big one, right? But then also create those specific behaviors that they want to get into for their service code, for their group, for the way they interact with customers. So that's why it's helpful to have that centralized CX person or team who can kind of guide all of that to make sure that nobody's contradicting each other, to make sure that you're not saying like this team is going to get back to customers in 2 hours and this team is going to get back to customers in 2 weeks. And there may be a reason for that, but you want to make sure that you are really aligned on how it all fits under the mission. So, how often should it be reviewed? I would say this is a great annual exercise because usually there is some sort of yearly feedback mechanism that we get both from customers and employees. Because sometimes what we're looking for is actually what's not working for the employees here. What are they missing? And if we see certain behaviors that aren't working, that can tell us that, you know what, we need to revisit this with the employees and figure out either what's not working or how can we make it work. Um, I wrote in a newsletter a couple weeks ago about how there was a medical team and they were kind of, throwing up their hands saying, wow, all these patients go to their healthcare providers and they want more empathy, but we don't have time to give them more empathy. The way the system works, we just can't do it. And when you think about that, it's a really interesting point because how much time does it really take to show empathy? But what they realized was that when a doctor stands during their visit and goes through the same information, people do not feel the same empathy as if a doctor sits and looks them in the eye. And so what they realized was a tool that they could provide was a simple stool in the room, right? Like something that a doctor could grab, sit down, look at the customer. Same amount of time, the customer felt more empathy. The patient felt more empathy, I should say. And so things like that make you realize that sometimes we just ask employees to behave a certain way and we don't think about some of those obstacles. We don't realize what tools are missing. And so we need to constantly check in with these employees who are customer facing and really make sure we're hearing from them on a regular basis. So if you do this annually, at least you have that as part of your annual planning, as part of revisiting your customer experience strategy, and really making sure that you're listening to the people on the ground. The other example I've shared before sometimes is that we sometimes forget to include the people who literally are on the ground interacting with customers. So we make all these big decisions and then we get there and they say, this is never going to work. Do you understand what happens when people are coming in? And if we don't actually interact with them, then we're going to miss opportunities to make this service code as good as it can be. Great question.
We've got another question that I absolutely adore. And I think you'll adore it too, Jeannie. What are your thoughts about codes for teams that, while they don't deal directly
Mhm.
with customers, their processes affect the customer experience, like accounts payable?
Mhm. Yes. So they are definitely part of the customer experience, right? And this is where we get into that higher level thinking of, okay, if customer experience is a mindset throughout our organization, what does that really mean? Well, it means we have to make sure that everybody throughout our organization understands that we have this customer experience mission statement. So that is universal throughout the organization. And then we have something that we call a success statement, right? And this is where you get into what is the strategy and how are we planning around that? So I actually encourage every team to have some sort of customer experience statement around their strategy for the team. So if you're in accounts payable, maybe you don't interact directly with customers, but you interact with people who support customers, right? And so that can be the connection that we want to make. I think of the service code as very specifically how do we deliver for our customers? So you can tweak that a little bit and say, who are we serving inside the organization who serve our customers? And what does that actually mean? So if we are not getting back to our internal colleagues, right? If our responsiveness within the organization is poor, then that's going to have an immediate impact on the customer experience. And we need to make sure we're connecting those dots. So, with the service code specifically, I really do like to focus on the customer facing individuals, but then you can take some of those best practices and start filtering them out throughout the organization. Very good question.
We had someone who needed to step out for a second. Can you pull back up that template example that you had
Hmm.
of the guideline, and maybe speak a little bit more to like how long should this be, or
Hmm. Sure. So, I like to, let me see if we can, there we go. So, when we do this, I tend to encourage that we err on the side of being concise and simplifying. And so the first, especially the first attempt, because sometimes these things can grow without us even realizing it, but the first attempt, keep it on one page. One page is your goal. And so that's including the mission statement, that's including the universal kind of service code. And then if you want to get into those specific behaviors, they're available to you, but don't overdo this. Because if you do, if I saw one example where somebody had 42 behaviors they were asking every single person who was working in their service area to deliver on. 42 behaviors for every interaction. I mean, think about that. That's like, if you think about how we go through our day and how many distractions there are in today's world, and how if we're not being intentional about customer experience, which is what this is all about, then it's very easy to slide into behaviors that we just know will be fast or we just know will work in that one scenario. And so if we are asking people to take on too much, they will do exactly what they've always done. They will fall into bad habits. If we say to them, hey, this week, you know what? We're asking everybody to answer the phone with a smile. And some people are going to groan and say, oh, that's cheesy, and share the science with them, right? Like if you smile, you send signals to your brain. It's an awesome cheat. I do it when I'm running sometimes because I don't like running sometimes. And I start smiling and suddenly I feel better. Weird, but it works. So if you share the why of all of this, and if you also share that this is all connected to our mission, right? If we promise a better world, we're going to create that from the very interaction we have, from the very first interaction we have with a customer. So get simple if you can, but also tie everything back to that why, tie everything back to those goals, and just build from there, because otherwise it's so easy to have 42 behaviors, or we're going to ask you for these 16 service signals, and you start getting crazy about almost being robotic. And what we want to do is empower people to make better judgment calls and to behave in certain ways that we know will be consistent. And so that's why you hear about the brands who do this really well. And even the language that they use is very different, right? And that can be simple. So instead of there are several examples of this, but sometimes you say thank you to somebody and they say no problem. Well, in many organizations now, they're saying, please don't say that. What we'd like you to say is, it's my pleasure. Very easy change, but makes a huge difference. So, those are the types of tweaks and behaviors that if we can actually give more direction and guidance, everybody else will feel better. If we say you've got to do 18 things every time you interact with a customer, that is not going to work. And then it will not work because then it will become scripted and it will become robotic. And what we're doing is empowering everybody to be who they are, be their authentic self, but at the same time, commit to certain behaviors, commit to certain agreements so that we create a more consistent customer journey end to end.
And I'll add this note from Christopher about an EXQ study, which identified we have 300 plus behavioral drivers which influence our decision making.
Yep.
So, like you said, Jeannie, being able to boil that down into a
Yep.
code that can empower people to make better decisions that are
Mhm.
consistent is much more attainable than trying to give them that list of 300 plus things.
Absolutely, and the other thing to consider is, like, even the example we showed, it's a lot of words, right? Like, that's a lot to take in. So, if you can visualize this, if you can come up with an acronym, any of those, like, brain tricks can really, really help as well. Actually, the fast casual and fast food industry does this a lot, and if you've ever driven up to the drive-through, sometimes you'll see a poster that says, like, "The 4 Ps," or something, and it really is about that, you know? So, getting to that level where we can simplify can really help people internalize it, which is really what we're trying to do.
Love that. We've got a question that came in from YouTube earlier this week from Saptarshi. Saptarshi would like to know how can we create a good experience for B2B customers when we're going through a digital transformation? What do we tell them to say, we're upgrading, we're not there yet, but we
Mhm,
want to be, we're working on it?
mhm.
How do
Yeah.
you, is that a satisfactory answer for customers? Is
Probably
there a
not
way to
for
do
the
that?
customer, yeah, in the
Yeah.
moment. I mean, digital transformation could that's a whole other definition, right? Like, that can mean so many different things in today's world, but essentially what I think the question is when things are not up to speed, internally, how do we express that to our customers? And I would say number 1 is keep them updated, right? And tell them your plans. You can talk about your product roadmap, you can talk about your, goals, and you can also say, "Here's what we're doing in the meantime." I think the frustration is often when customers want to do something, it's unavailable, especially if it was available in the past and there's maybe a hiccup where it's going to be temporarily unavailable. They are going to get frustrated because why isn't it available and what happened and everything else. And so when we're just given as people, when we're just given those roadblocks without options, that's where you lose all control as a customer and you feel very frustrated. I use the example of error messages here a lot because sometimes we have these error messages. You fill out a form. This just happened to me. So I filled out a form online and I'm in the United States. So I use the drop down for United States. Every time I tried to submit, it would light up as if that was an error. And I tried so many different things and I couldn't move forward. And the worst part was the error basically just said, no, this is wrong. And then it deleted all the information in my form. And that is the perfect example of, like, when we are not giving the right answer to our customers and we're not giving them any other way to move forward. We need to look at, okay, what is going to change in the digital transformation? What is not working right now that will be working later? How can we give them the fastest, easiest, most seamless workaround for this period of time? And let's paint the picture of the future and say, we heard you and this is why we're working on it. So all of those things, and then make sure that we close the loop and come back and say, hey, that thing that you asked for, it's live now. We would really love for you to use it. So there are a couple layers to this, but really it's about setting expectations and making sure that we're honest about those expectations, because that's what drives how people feel about the experience. So the more authentically we can kind of paint the picture of reality and what will be happening, the more customers will respond to that.
We've got one more question that came via email this week. If you're in the chat live right now and you've got a question, this is your moment. Get that question in. So the last question that we've got from email this week asks, there's an opening in my office and I'm applying to be the CX leader in my team. What advice would you give for
Mm.
someone like me, both in the interview and when I win the role? Let's be optimistic. Let's not say if, let's say when. What advice would you give someone just starting out in
Mhm.
a CX role?
What a great question, and I know I've written about this, and I can't think of exactly where, so David, if you have any ideas, we will, drop that in, but, uh, okay, so a couple things. One is I really like when in the interview process, you show your expertise by asking the big questions, and what I mean by that is, a lot of times in organizations, they start with tactics, right? Sometimes they have things like, "We need a person to lead customer journey mapping." And maybe that's a great role, but you want to ask about, okay, how does this fit in to the greater strategy? How have you connected your customer experience goals with your organizational goals? What are some of the ways that you think I could have an impact on that? How can I lead in the best way for the organization? Who are we connected to? Who do we need to build coalitions with? There in the State of CX report from Get Feedback in 2022, the CX leaders who reported a higher return on investment also reported a higher level of collaboration throughout the organization. Those two things go hand in hand. And so you want to make sure that you understand kind of the landscape of, are we building coalitions? Do we have those coalitions? What sort of influence and what sort of authority do we have over the different parts of the customer journey? All of those things are super, super important to just get at during the interview process. And I think it also shows that you're thinking bigger picture than a lot of people, frankly, who are, going in to measure. We want to be leaders beyond that. And so I would show them that. Once you're in the role, the same thread gets pulled here. You want to start building coalitions early. You want to start reaching out to other leaders in the organization who either need a little more influence or who are trying to do things on behalf of the customer. You want to make sure that that they know that you're a cheerleader, you're a peer, you're somebody who is there to empower them to do that. There are a lot of different ways to do this. You can go super low tech. I've seen things like, one of the CX leaders I worked with actually created her own NPS system, and she basically kept score of which leaders had she kind of moved forward in CX and which ones still weren't convinced. I thought that was really clever. The other thing I've seen is doing things like lunch and learns, where you ask those different leaders to share, okay, what part of, tell us about the customer experience of your part of the organization, or share with the customer experience team how, this technology supports what we're doing. Anything like that. People love to share their own expertise. They love to be asked. So that can be a great way to do it. And then you can also flip that and say, hey, you know what? Our team is doing lunch and learns now. Come learn about NPS. Come learn about these things that we do. So there are all sorts of different ways to build those coalitions, but that has to be a priority no matter who you are or what organization, because that's really what leads to CX success.
Delightful. I did add a link to an article that I really liked, Jeannie. I'm not sure if it's the one that you were thinking of, but it's how to be a change agent at your organization. I
Great.
think
Thanks
that's a
for
great,
finding that.
yeah, I think that's a great place to jump in. Of course, we have, I think 700, something like that, other articles at experienceinvestigators.com. We've got over a dozen resources, and there's all sorts of other ways that you can engage with us and continue to learn and
And
grow.
videos, right? On YouTube.
Videos. Yeah, we've got 75 plus videos on YouTube. These sessions, we record them, we put them on YouTube in the archives. Those are all available to you. And of course, Jeannie, there are plenty of other ways people can connect with you.
That's right.
What are some of those ways?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Thanks everybody for being here. It's always delightful to see what you're working on, to hear your smart questions. So thank you so much for joining us here. So you can find us all these different ways: Twitter, LinkedIn, you can email, you can get more resources, all of those things. Because, like I said in the beginning, we really do a lot of our content development based on what you need, what you're asking for, what your challenges are. So reach out and let us know if there's a resource that you're looking for, if you want more of these sessions to be focused on different things. We are all ears here. So please reach out. And as always, I wanted to share that our mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by being here with me today, by learning about customer experience, by being those change agents where you are helping us live that mission. So thank you so much. Keep up the great work, everybody. And for those of us in the States, get those last few days of summer in and enjoy. And we will see you again here in a couple weeks. Thanks, everybody.